Do you think South Africa has the requisite buying power to sort of create a return on investment? So it's quite interesting that you say that, overseas investments does see buying power within South Africa. Why do you think it's something that we struggle to see within ourselves?
Many companies in South Africa, some large and some listed companies, are sitting with huge cash reserves on their balance sheets because they're afraid to deploy the capital.
Just bringing it back to the transformation fund. I understand there's the financial element of it, but not a lot of people know about the non-financial health that is being as well applied to help the small businesses and the medium-sized businesses. Can you maybe tell me more on that, what it looks like and how you feel about it?
About 80% of businesses fail in the first 1 or 2 years. That's a sort of general growth stat. And so to help reduce that failure rate, firstly, you need to.
Welcome to another episode of Thooto Talks. I'm your host, Teja Dumisha Sifoka, and today I'm joined by the Managing Director of B-Innovation, Lee Ducree. Lee, how are you doing today?
Very good, thanks.
Fantastic. So today we're going to be discussing the controversial transformation fund. So for people who don't know what it is, how could you explain the transformation fund at its most simplistic essence?
So the Transformation Fund is a proposal by the government, in particular the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, to eventually build it to 100 billion rand over a 5-year period, which would then be deployed towards helping small businesses through the BE codes of good practice, where those small businesses will be developed by capital injections and other types of support.
Mm. And you said 100 billion over 5 years. Just how realistic is that target?
So in the industry, most of us don't think that's pretty realistic at the moment. And I'll tell you why. There was a report released by the BE Commission, I think it was 2021, which stated that annually there's 26 billion rands worth of ESP funding that gets put out into the market. Now, if companies already have, if the figure at that time of 26 billion rand, we can assume it might be slightly higher now due to inflation, or maybe slightly less due to economic contraction. Like, I don't know what the figures, I couldn't find an updated one. But what that's going to mean is that every single company in the country would have to stop doing what they're currently doing with BE and their current initiatives. And even if they all channel all of their money into this transformation fund, only then would it be able to reach its target. The likelihood of everybody stopping their existing initiatives is probably zero, because those initiatives are largely impactful already. They are beneficiaries. There's already small businesses that are being helped and supported and grown. So it's highly unrealistic.
So from my understanding, what you're saying is that the transformation fund is then going to need to like an abandonment of those initiatives that have already been proposed.
So the initial fear when the draft was released is that was the expectation from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. It's since been clarified that companies are not going to be obligated only to support the fund. They can continue their existing transformation initiatives around enterprise and supply development.
Okay.
Which of course makes the likelihood of success on 20 billion rand a year even less. So it's, I can't see it realistically being able to succeed. I would struggle to see them even getting to 10% of their target.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, from my understanding, is this something that's going to be like initiated by the government, like through some sort of like a special vehicle, special purpose vehicle rather?
Yes, so that was exactly the terminology that they use. So the special purpose vehicle, SPV for short, would then be developed to channel all the BE spend into as part of this transformation fund. That would then be managed and overseen by a board appointed by the minister. So you can already see the risk.
Yeah.
You can already see the risk of political influence. So many people will say, well, if over all the years, um, government has struggled to demonstrate enough uh, tangible and solid outputs with what they already have, why would we trust them with more money? So all that does then is open up the door for accusations from political parties, for example, and other analysts to say, well, it's becoming a slush fund for ANC cadres to be able to steal more money out of the economy because they're running out of money to steal from other places. So it's difficult to try to defend against that when if you've not succeeded already in everything that you'd be implementing, how can we trust you now with something new?
Hmm. How then do we prevent corruption in that situation? Like how do we implement like a proper oversight mechanism, say the bill is going to be adopted? What do we do in that situation?
So one of the ways would be a lot more private sector involvement, assuming you could actually get it to succeed. At the moment, it's minimal private sector involvement that the draft allows for. Um, and in my mind, I'm not surprised again because what that does is then provide room for people and their friends to help channel money to those around.
So someone starting their own like sort of like third party entity to sort of bid for maybe the permit.
Well, those already exist. There are a number of entities in the market that are already doing that kind of thing. But this is a particular government vehicle we're talking about, this particular SPV. And in this SPV, I think because of the amount of government influence, I think corporate South Africa and business in general would struggle to trust that it's going to have the best interests of business, and in particular small black-owned businesses at heart, because again, the track record speaks for itself. Now, if government said, we want to support an initiative much like they did with the Yes Initiative, where that was a private sector-led initiative, which was then incorporated into the BEE scorecard and gave businesses additional benefits on their BEE scorecard for supporting job creation for unemployed youth. If something like that came along and it was independently overseen and managed by the private sector, the way Yes currently is, I think that could get more backing. And assuming it had additional benefits like perhaps an extra bonus point or something. That I think would be more attractive to business in South Africa from a BE compliance perspective than just saying, here's this government managed and run entity that's going to be overseen by the minister. So if the DTI were willing to reconsider its position and were willing to allow for a private sector-led initiative, I think that can work. Like, for example, going back to Yes, some of the board members of Yes are very high profile, very trustworthy, very well-known individuals from big business throughout the country. Authority, basically. They have an authority, and some of the founding members of Yes were organizations like Investec. Nedbank was one of the first larger banks to start a Yes program. You had a number of those kinds of entities. So if you could pull in that sort of level of executive to oversee and have a completely independence of government, I think that's more likely to be successful than the current format in the draft document.
And what do you think the probability of that happening is?
Highly unlikely. For the reasons I've mentioned earlier, because that will unfortunately take away the opportunity for certain people at their threads to be able to pillage the fund and channel money towards their preferred initiatives that their friends are running, which will very likely not even be sustainable initiatives because it will be run by an entrepreneur who understands how business works, who understands how to manage their compliance and their governance of their finance. And of course, part of B is helping to develop those skills. But my point is, whatever we're going to invest in is probably going to end up being completely wasted. So, for example, CIFA, the Small Enterprise Finance Agency, I think almost 70% of its investments don't come back. So why, and that's a government entity designed to help finance small businesses. Why would we trust government with this finding when all of those fit under the same DTIC umbrella?
That 70% that doesn't come back, is it bad investment or looting of funds?
Well, they call it bad investment, which already speaks to their poor internal management. But modestly, it could very well just be looting of funds that's hidden as a bad investment by classifying it.
So it was unveiled, basically.
It would not surprise me. I can't prove that, but it wouldn't be a surprise based on the way we see most other things operating.
Mm. And within an economy like South Africa, I guess one thing that I thought about, like when they said, 100 billion rand over 5 years to invest into small businesses, I get the initiative, but do you think South Africa has the requisite buying power to sort of create a return on investment?
Absolutely, it does with the right businesses in the right sectors. Ike, South Africa is, you'll be surprised to know how many foreign governments have interest in investing very large amounts of money. I was in a meeting recently with a government official, and they were saying how they've got certain countries that this country wants to bring in X number of hundreds of billions of this currency and that currency
Okay.
from different places to do different things and for different parts of the country. So the money exists. So if you've got these foreign business leaders so interested in bringing that investment into the country, it shows you that people are seeing something we're not seeing, which of course speaks to, and we know our country is really starting economic developments, and there's multiple reasons for that. But if everybody else in the world sees the opportunity, then that tells you there's more to it than perhaps we like to acknowledge. Um, it's obvious that if we were able to access a lot of those investments, it'd be great for job creation in the country, great for economic growth, etc. So I think the opportunities are there. And I would suggest that perhaps the easiest industries to start with would be export type industries.
Okay.
Obviously, it may become a little more difficult these days to export to America, but the rest of the world is Alexis. And so the Europeans have made it quite clear that they are looking to be more friendly with South Africa, and the rest of the world as well. And the rest of the world has also made it quite clear that they're looking to become more friendly with each other now that everybody seems to be developing a new common enemy in the West.
Hmm. So it's quite interesting that you say that, overseas investments does see buying power within South Africa. Why do you think it's something that we struggle to see within ourselves?
I don't know that we just struggle to see it ourselves. I think part of the problem is that capital in South Africa is afraid to invest. So I can't recall what the figure is, but many companies in South Africa, some large and some listed companies, are sitting with huge cash reserves on their balance sheets because they're afraid to deploy the capital because they're afraid of policy uncertainty. Now, that can only come down to governance, right? There's nobody else who manages and controls that apart from government. So what I'm trying to say is, obviously, government needs to step up around policy certainty so that these entities can invest the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of rands that they have available, which they're not paid to do. If you had a pretty reasonable chunk of your savings and you had an opportunity to invest in something which you weren't sure that it would be safe or stable, would you invest it?
No.
Nobody would. So you can't blame these entities for also feeling uncertain and insecure about that. And then that's up to government. Now, I think the GNU seems to be performing better than some people would have thought, in some ways, which is great for the country. Ultimately, there's still too many problems. Like, for example, the recent gazette that came from the health minister, which was this ridiculous unilateral ban on any cannabis and hemp-related products. It made absolutely no sense. It was completely contrary to what the president has so recently spoken about in the Sona this year and in previous Sonas, in what other MECs and ministers and premiers are talking about in some of their State of the Province addresses and those budget votes. And so to suddenly have this unilateral ban shows you just it's a perfect example of why capital in South Africa is afraid. Now imagine if you had decided to invest in a hemp or a cannabis business, and let's say you were an agricultural business and you decided to put 50 million rand into some kind of agricultural project that was hemp related. And out of nowhere, this gazette pops up on a Friday that says you can't do anything anymore. What happens to your money? What happens to your business? What happens to your client sales? So government shoots itself in the foot. If government continues doing that, you're not going to get companies feeling safe to invest in South Africa, local or far.
And just bringing it back to the transformation fund. I understand there's the financial element of it, but not a lot of people know about the non-financial health that is being as well applied to help the small businesses and the medium-sized businesses. Can you maybe tell me more on that, what it looks like and how you feel about it?
So sometimes the non-financial support is more valuable. And this is part of my problem with the transformation fund at the moment. If you have a large company listed or just a private large company, even a medium-sized company that's invested 10 million rand into supporting a couple of entrepreneurs. So they may have put money into supplying equipment, trading, skills development, compliance, etc. And if along that journey, this larger company says, as part of us developing you, we are also going to provide you with off-take agreements. So we need you to learn how to manufacture to our global standard your widgets. And we need 10,000 widgets a month. We're going to help you set that up. We're going to use our technical teams to help upskill your technical teams. And then you're welcome to sell to anybody else in the country and anybody else in the world that you want as well. So now there's a degree of financial and non-financial support there, right? So the non-financial support to your question is the access to markets, it's the technical skills, it's all of that stuff, which honestly is probably more likely to make the business succeed than just the financial support up top. There's no way the transformation fund will be able to do that in its current form. Why would a business say, okay, Mr. Government Fund, you've taken my BE money, and now you still want me to take
my skills of our time and just pass it on. So they don't entirely have an incentive, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, correct.
And how do you incentivize them in that situation?
You incentivize them by leaving them alone. That is what they are already doing, but perhaps you help them do it better. So some of the criticism that comes from this draft transformation fund document is accurate, by the way. And some of the criticism is that some of the money is wasted. So that is true.
Yeah.
And it is true that the private sector can do a better job of better implementing some of its enterprise and supply development initiatives. So I'm not going to act like the document is a complete waste of time. So there is room for the private sector to improve. But ultimately, you will disincentivize the private sector if you try to take away that control that they have. Because here's what else it does, because we've seen this, right? So a parent company or larger company or donor company helps the smaller company, and it's usually it has to be majority black owned. And they do this big PR thing at the end once they've managed to establish some kind of proper outcomes. And the kind of emotional responses that you get from the beneficiaries, the business owners, the employees, the managers inside those organizations, and then in turn, the kind of emotional responses you get from the people inside the larger company that gave the donations, because they can see what a difference it makes to the lives of those people. That sometimes is more powerful than anything government will ever be able to do in a vote.
And when you say the kind of response, is there any like story that particularly stands out to you?
It's a very good question, actually. I mean, I've been to so many events where you'll sit with a owner of a company who got a R1 million grant, for example, or even 500,000 rand or whatever it was. Sometimes it's even less if it's a smaller business, depending on the industry, right? Um, and they got the technical support and skilled and the off-take agreements, etc. And you'll see these people cry. They'll have their wife in the audience and you'll say, thank you, Mr. Donor Company. You don't understand what this did for me and my family. I want to introduce you to my wife. And these are my kids. My kids can now have a meal every day. My kids can go to school in a safe neighborhood or environment. My team are able to take their salaries and help change the lives of their family members. And of course, we all understand the multiplier effect in South Africa as well, with things like black tax that exist. So every person that you give an opportunity to, that multiplier effect is incredible. When you see that happen over and over again, you'll start to appreciate more the value and the importance of enterprise and supplier capability initiatives that are serious and that are implemented properly. Again, that doesn't take away from the fact that there are some, I call them useless, because they are. Some that's just tick boxes. That's true. You're never going to get it right all of the time. But when it works really well.
Mhm. And just to go back a little bit, I understand that one of the goals is to get corporations to contribute to, financially to this fund. So what effect will that have on actual transformation in supply chains?
Well, I think it goes back to my earlier comment about the fact that you disincentivize the value corporate from wanting that direct relationship with the beneficiary, because the beneficiary no longer sits with you. You no longer have a relationship with that beneficiary. If I know you, Preez, I'm going to say, I want to help you. I'm going to buy you a new laptop to help you set up your new business. And I'm going to provide you with procurement opportunities from my business. And if you need office space, I will give you that too. And we're going to get our finance team to help ensure that your finances are compliant. I have an incentive because I know you, you're sure you succeed. So the kinds of stories you hear all the time is that there's this direct mentorship relationship between the organization and the beneficiary. Sometimes that's outsourced to a service provider. If it's a good service provider, that's great. Uh, so you hear those kinds of stories. But if I'm just told, give 10 rand to the transformation fund and we'll do something, I don't know you anymore. I'm not going to say, let me introduce you to my network, because now you don't exist to me. You're just a number at a random fund.
There's no intention behind it.
Yes. But if I know you, I'm going to say, I'm going to this high profile networking event. There's going to be these kinds of people in the audience. I think they're going to be good for your startup business. Come with me, taking you as my plus one. Let me introduce you to that network. That is more powerful and more valuable than a cash handout from a transformation fund where they're not going to manage or support you properly anyway, because your track record proves that they can't.
So that speaks to the non-financial element of it again.
Yeah.
And in this situation, the transformation, let's say it gets implemented, what does the return on investment look like after 5 years?
For the donor company.
Or the transformation fund in general? Like what effect do you think that would have on the South African economy? Say that it's, what kind of metrics will we track?
Well, one of the metrics they should be tracking is the size of those businesses and how many employees they've employed, how the revenues and the profits of those businesses have grown because of the investment. Now, I'm pretty confident that's not something they would do a good job of, because if they were doing a good job of, CIFA would have been more successful here and its outcomes, right? They don't need a transformation fund. They just need to use what they already have better, like IDC, NEF, CIFA, etc., and then some of the provincial DFIs.
You said NEF and IDC. Can you maybe explain to me what that is?
National Empowerment Fund, which is a fund targeted predominantly at majority Black owned and Black women owned businesses, that helps them with growth capital, but also acquisition capital if they were to buy a stake in or buy over an entire business. IDC is a little bit more industrial, so it tends to be larger scale. I think they have less of a BE requirement on the IDC side. And yeah, the CIFA tends to focus on the smaller end, the smaller businesses that need smaller powers.
So if these initiatives already exist, then what would the necessity of the transformation fund be?
Because they're looking for another vehicle to get more money out.
even think it's genuine.
It's hard to trust that it's genuine based on historical evidence.
There's no evidence of like a success story from centralizing funds into government-owned entities.
Look, there are some success stories, right? It's unfair to say that there are none.
Okay.
But those success stories tend to be politically connected uh, people and who had a friend and had enough connections to be able to guarantee some of the outcomes. So part of the problem is centralization. Now we understand that the ANC has always believed in democratic centralism, and they want to control everything from a central point. My view is that's part of the problem. You can never successfully ever control everything from a central point. If you allow more people more authority, of course, there has to be governance, proper governance in place. But if you disperse that authority, what you then do is you create more competition against the others, and you allow them to compete against each other for success. And so that you help improve outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And you know, helping in trying to improve outcomes, I guess, businesses that would need outcomes being improved are ones in the rural and township areas. Do you think that they would have adequate access to the transformation fund, or will it be centralized within, people who are well connected to people administering the fund?
I mean, it's more likely that the well-connected people have benefits. But to the first part of your question about the rural and township areas, so government has this belief that you can chuck 10,000 entrepreneurs into a machine and you can spit out 10,000 entrepreneurs that you've manufactured. You can never manufacture entrepreneurs. That's why most of those government programs fail. I would challenge them to tell us, of all the entrepreneurs they've trained throughout all the government projects, in all the provinces and municipalities in all the years, how many of those are still in business? How many of those are employing people? And how many of those have grown their revenue output significantly? I'm pretty confident you can say it's very low. I wouldn't be surprised if in some cases it's zero, possibly. Right? That wouldn't surprise me either, because entrepreneurship is very difficult. It's more difficult than people appreciate until they've tried it themselves. There's a reason most people fail, because most people are not cut out for it. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But you cannot take somebody who's had very little exposure and experience to how the real world operates in business and otherwise, and try to manufacture them into an entrepreneur. You are going to fail. The only thing you're doing is looking for vanity numbers so that you can say in your report back speech on whatever platform that we trained so many thousands of entrepreneurs. The metric is not how many you train, it's how many are still in business and how many are employing more people.
And in your experience, what do you think like the tenure is like when the small businesses collapse?
What's the what? Sorry?
How long does it take for them to collapse?
Well, the stats say that I think it's about 80% of businesses fail in the first 1 or 2 years. That's a sort of general pro stat. Uh, and so to help reduce that failure rate, firstly, you need to recruit better. You got to recruit stronger candidates into your program. But secondly, you need to ensure that they are supported properly. So because I come from the BM transformation space, I'm going to reference some of the apartheid businesses that were set up. Those were supported by the state, right? And that's why we have a lot of the Afrikaner billionaires that we have now, because the apartheid state at that time supported a number of those businesses to be able to grow so that they could employ Afrikaner people. So I understand where the current government gets its thinking from, to say, well, let's try to borrow that same model.
Yes.
And let's also try to leverage our resources to grow black businesses. Great in theory, but when your track record has proven that all that happens with the money is that if it's stolen and it goes to your friends, we're not going to trust you anymore. So even though in principle I understand what they try to do, and I cannot in good conscience advise anybody to support the transformation fund.
And just to close off, if you don't necessarily advise for the transformation fund to be implemented, can you then give me like 3 actionable steps to, go about achieving true transformation?
Yes, so that comes back to the earlier point I made about businesses definitely having room to improve. So, for example, initiatives shouldn't be about ticking boxes inside your organization. If you're going to develop a small black-owned business, integrate them into your supply chain, but do it properly. It has to be from an executive and a board level. If you've got a junior staff member responsible for everything without that executive and senior support, it's not going to succeed as much as it could. So you need the buy-in. I'm not saying the executives must sit in a meeting once a week with the beneficiaries. That would be an unreasonable expectation. But they should absolutely have oversight of what the beneficiaries are doing, how they're tracking, what do they need, because sometimes you may have initially determined that a beneficiary has a certain need, and then as the program starts and as you start developing, you realize, well, actually the need expands a little bit further. The person whose job it is to manage and implement that budget doesn't have the authority to say, well, we can't help you further. Sorry, they're just going to say, well, this is it. Now, that being it can sometimes mean the failure of the business, right? Even if they tried everything. An executive who's smart is going to see this and see that here's the gap. If I just give 10% extra to fill this gap, we can quadruple that business's revenue. The implementer who doesn't have that authority to make that change isn't going to be able to see that, as one example. So get more involved with your beneficiaries, understand what their needs are better. Make sure if you're going to have an external service provider doing your implementation, make sure you choose a good service provider. There are lots of good ones out there, but there's also lots of bad ones. Make sure they've got a good track record. Make sure they're not archaic in their thinking around how they're providing solutions. I mean, there's so much technology that can simplify a lot of these processes. So those are some of the simple things that can be done from the start.
All right, Lee, thank you so much for joining us. To our viewers at home, please do like, share, comment, and subscribe, and do catch us next week for our next episode. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
How was